Although most of British industry has been shut down for the last 2 weeks, the financial markets have been surprisingly active. Sterling has had a particularly good week, putting on nearly 4 cents since Christmas. Money Week tonight takes a quick look back at some of the financial highlights of 1986 and a look forward to what might be in store for us in 1987.
In China, 1986 was the year of the tiger. We too concerned ourselves with endangered species. Here it was both National Bat Year and, for the first time ever, Industry Year. Special stamps were issued and prayers offered up.
How good it would be if, in Industry Year, we could see a change in some of our basic attitudes to the creation of those things by which we all live.
Down in Yeovil, the prayers for help from the loss-making helicopter manufacturer Westland were answered by a consortium led by their US rival Sikorsky. It was an arrangement frowned upon by Michael Heseltine, the Defense Secretary, who backed a European solution, but supported by Leon Britton, his industry equivalent.
I have resigned from the Cabinet and I will make a full statement later today.
The Heseltine sacrifice was not in vain. When it came to four-wheel drive, anti-American sentiment carried the day. The government's plans to sell off Land Rover were scuppered by an outburst of patriotic fervour.
I speak here solely because I'm extremely proud to be an Englishman.
Meanwhile, the future of Fleet Street was being settled in less gentlemanly fashion elsewhere. Rupert Murdoch went ahead with his plan to print in Wapping.
Biggest issue of the Sunday Times ever out of one plant.
Well, I hope I'm ready.
Today wasn't ready enough. The technology in which its proprietor put great faith proved fallible. 6 months later, Eddy Shar was forced to sell out. 2 new stars appeared on the national media firmament. Menachem Golan and Yoram Globus, the founders of Cannon Films, took over screen entertainment and put their stamp firmly on the British film industry. Using images straight from a Cannon epic, beat off Argyll for the hand of the Scottish company Distillers. But the Guinness tactics left a bitter taste in the mouth north of the border.
I supported those that were supporting Guinness, and I have to repent as a sinner because I got it wrong.
Weren't the only producers of the black stuff to face problems. In January, oil slumped to the then unbelievably low price of $20 a barrel. A month later, it was below 10. By the time it rallied, half of Texas, a fair percentage of Aberdeen, and Sheikh Yamani himself were out of work. And other events didn't go quite as planned. In May, the United States bombed Libya and in the process blitzed American tourism to Britain. BA hit back into Chilean fashion, giving away 5,000 seats.
Never in aviation history have so many been able to win so much in such a short period of time.
The autumn brought better news, the launch of the first posh daily for 130 years. BL bounced back with the new Rover, whilst its former stablemate came up with something traditional.
The Jag XJ6.
Its launch accompanied by the traditional British strike. The sort of thing that Nissan in the northeast hoped to do without. Mrs. Thatcher did the honours, Japanese style.
It wasn't all new model launches and factory openings. World overcapacity forced General Motors to close its truck-making operation in Bedford. 1,500 jobs were lost. 1986 was, of course, the year of Big Bang, when the city hoped to regain its position at the centre of the world's financial markets. Critics accused it of surrendering a vital part of the economy to outside control by allowing foreign companies membership of the stock market.
5 years expensive, let's get some of this done.
Its admirers praised the final abolition of fixed commissions and the adoption of the latest electronic wizardry, which didn't always work as intended.
But what about TA? Not TA's all there. But TB, TC, come on, tell me.
But those little surprises were nothing compared to the shock of the Bersky scandal. The Wall Street confessed to insider dealing, was fined $100 million, banned from dealing, but first agreed to help with further investigations.
6, 5,
Whilst the response was less than expected, the British gas share issue still attracted 4.5 million applications. It seemed nothing could halt the march of people's capitalism. The year ended as it began, up in the air, in a row about defence. The government finally opted for the Boeing AWACS. After 9 years' development and £1 billion, Nimrod was grounded forever.
In 1987. The forecasters are betting on late spring and early summer, when the economy should be at its rosiest. Certainly 1987 shows all the symptoms.
1987 is going to be rapid. We've got a consumer boom on our hands of major proportions. We've got pay increases running ahead very rapidly indeed in real terms, and credit is unbelievably easy. The combination of these factors and rising levels of employment is going to generate consumption increases of 5, 6, even 7% per annum, and that's going to generate a very substantial growth in the economy as a whole.
Last year's forecasts were thrown by the sudden collapse in the price of oil. North Sea revenue plummeted, and with it sterling. This year, the new Saudi oil minister, Hisham Nasser, hopes to boost prices by limiting production, but keeping fellow OPEC members in line is easier said than done, and the prospects are uncertain. A moderate oil price and a reasonable exchange rate should benefit industry. The engineering industry could profit from cheaper energy, whilst export should be boosted by more competitive sterling. This will lead the way.
The industry, which has been growing most solidly throughout the Depression and throughout recent years, is in the services, financial services and so on. We continue to think that that will be the leading element in the economy and the area in which jobs will come from.
In fact, since July's peak of 3.25 million, unemployment has begun to improve. But if the government does have an election in mind, it must hope that the forecaster's prediction of a fall below the elusive 3 million mark by the end of the year will come true.
Employment itself, employment that is not unemployment, will grow, we think, fairly strongly. But at the same time, the labour force is growing as more people participate, in particular women. So only about a half of the increase in employment will feed through into a cut in unemployment. So perhaps a fall in unemployment of around 100,000.
So with more of us in work and industry blooming, the economic outlook appears rosy, but there are dark clouds on the horizon. Inflation looks particularly threatening. The first half of last year showed a remarkable improvement from 5.5% to 2.5%. But since then, the figure has been creeping back up, and it compares badly with our main rivals. From a mere 1%, the Japanese managed to finish the year with no inflation at all. The Germans went one better, actually enjoying negative inflation from April onwards. So what have they got that we haven't?
Our unit labour costs are still accelerating at nearly twice the rate of our competitors. UK unit labour costs are running at about 6%. Of Germany, Japan, the US is running at about 3%. That means as time goes on, there is a widening gap between the competitiveness of sterling against the other major currencies.
An erosion of our competitive position is bad enough. Combine it with an unchecked consumer boom, sucking in imports, and the balance of trade is likely to be upset. The question is not whether a deficit will occur, but just how big it will be. 4 years ago, we were a good £3 billion in the black. Since then, the results have been erratic. Last year, we just about broke even, but next year, even the optimists say we'll be in the red to the tune of £1.5 billion, whilst the pessimists put it as big as 5.
There are two reasons for our pessimism. The first is that demand in the economy is very, very dependent on consumer spending. And as we've seen recently, the consumer spending boom tends to suck in an awful lot of imports and deteriorate the trade balance. That's going to continue in 1987 and be worsened by the fact that is likely to remain overvalued.
I don't myself think that there are good reasons to be very gloomy about the balance of payments. I would expect exports to respond. I do expect the exchange rate to fall further and hence help competitiveness. I don't expect the economy to be so buoyant as to draw in massive amounts of imports. Now, if I a super boom this year, that would be enough the balance of payments could turn out.
But the off. In the meantime, what's going to happen on the home is remarkable for the explosion in house prices, especially in the more affluent and overcrowded southeast. Last year in the north, house prices rose by 6%, whilst in London by a massive 25%. According to the Halifax, the price increases will slow down this year, but the gap will still remain. In the north, it may ease to 5%, whilst here in London it should fall to 18%. Still little consolation for those who would like to move to the south. But mortgages should be cheaper if, as many predict, Britain joins the European monetary system.
I could see 2% coming off interest rates in the second half of the year, and that being mirrored with a 2% drop in mortgage rates as well.
And there should be good news for the millions of new shareholders. Since last spring's dramatic surge to an all-time high of 1,717.6 on April the 3rd, the index has been indecisive but still ended the year up 250 points at 1,679. But the city is looking for an even better performance this year.
If I had to put a guess on this, I would say that the market will rise quite strongly in the opening months of 1987, top out and move sideways throughout the remainder of the year. But a pretty good year for stockbrokers and not at all a bad one for investors.
So before their calculator batteries run out and they have to get down to the serious business of guessing what will happen to the price of drink and cigarettes in the next budget, we asked our economists for their final verdicts on 1987.
I think it'll be an extremely good year as far as the financial markets are concerned, and it will be judged a good year in terms of economic performance. But it won't do very much to improve Britain's long-run prospects in the years ahead.
I think it will be a very nice year to have lived through for most people, with big pay rises, okay, somewhat higher inflation, balance payments which isn't too bad, taxes which have been reduced, living standards which have risen very sharply indeed, and stock market which has probably risen at least in the early months of the year quite well as well.
It's a good year for those of us who are in work, and a bad year for those of us who aren't.
Some predictions for 1987. I'm sorry we lost sound for a moment or two there. What I was actually saying was that our nation's economists had been gazing into their crystal balls to do just that, predict for 1987.